Okay, hello everyone. Today we are meeting once again for the Young Academy of Scotland Cross-Pollinating projects. This time we will be discussing an event that the three of us attended in December 2025. Before I discuss the event, I think it may be helpful for us to introduce ourselves. And I'll start in no particular order. I'm going to start with who I see in my screen. First of all, Brian, if you would like to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, certainly. So my name is Brian Connolly. I currently work in the public sector in Scottish Enterprise, which is the economic development agency for Scotland. So again, very much kind of enjoyed getting involved in this project and looking at, I suppose, that notion of interdisciplinary learning, how we can kind of engage across different fields, look at communication, look at kind of shorthand, and fundamentally where we can exchange knowledge and look for ways to kind of, I suppose, improve that awareness of how we engage with one another. Thanks a lot.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Brian. And then I'll move to Vitaly.
Thank you very much, Urania. My name is Vitaly Diakov. I work in the third sector in an organization called Bring Together, and also I'm a professional mediator. So coming to this conference was particularly interest for me. However, I felt that it will be a barrier for me to get closer to anatomy, as I am not. I hadn't attended a medical school. However, I was hope to learn more about the area, but also get familiar with the environment and the culture, and also the practices of teaching in anatomy, as Urania already previously before the conference shared about what maybe some of the topics can emerge during the conference and how they can be interesting for those who are not academics or students of medical schools. So yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Vitaly. So, and to conclude, my name is Urania Varsu. I am one of the senior lecturers at the University of Glasgow, and this time I organized hosting our colleagues Brian and Vitaly to the Winter Anatomical Society. So this links very nicely with what Vitaly mentioned, which is anatomy. So the conference was the winter meeting of the Anatomical Society, which brought together anatomists throughout the UK, Ireland, and beyond. And we specifically targeted day two because it involved pedagogical research, and we felt that this would be the most appropriate for us to attend. And as was mentioned before the event, I circulated a wee glossary just to go over some of the terms and make sure that we are all as familiar as we could with the topics covered. So, in terms of, I think we have covered the event quite well, and in terms of what it entailed and the discipline as well. I think it will be helpful to move into the next part, which is what did we actually think about the event. So I will start again with no specific order. I'm starting with who I see on my screen. I'll start first of all with Brian. So, what did you think about the event?
I think going into any event like this, and certainly coming from a background which is very far removed from anatomy, there's always that kind of, I suppose, mix of anticipation of learning something completely new and engaging and yeah, building knowledge and learning. I love learning. It's something I've always kind of very much kind of, took to heart. But I think there's also an apprehension because you're coming into something that I say you are very much disconnected from, and you want to have those conversations, you want to have discussions with people, but you also recognize you're very far removed from the subject matter. I think kind of reflecting over some of the specific sessions. So again, I think it was Professor Gabriel Finn's keynote on like reframing educational research. And for me, it kind of really resonated the challenge around kind of measuring what matters versus what's easy to count. So again, it's getting into the depth of what do we actually want to take from educational research, regardless of the field. I've also kind of again identified with like the frustration at EDI challenges being identical almost in many ways to innovation ecosystem problems. Um, some of the work around kind of again the I was quite surprised by the vigour of poetic inquiry. So again, I've used poetry myself in terms of summarising events and using it to kind of, I suppose, connect with people in quite complex terms around business. But I think it was really good to see this applied in something that's extremely technical. And again, the rigour that was there is more sophisticated than I expected. Finally, I would say again, I was quite refreshed almost by I think it was Dr. Harris's approach to kind of AI versus some of the typical binary framing. So again, it's that kind of evolution of thinking. How do we look at things differently? And the AI isn't just a solution that can be slotted in. It has to work within what we've already got. So those were a few kind of feelings and thoughts to kick things off.
Fantastic. So it's interesting to hear these thoughts because as an anatomist, there is some of the thoughts that pop in my head as well, especially when you mention AI and how we need to consider what's already happening and how we can work with what we have and also not face the reality in a way that AI is there, is what do we do with it and how do we address that. But some of the other thoughts as well. I'm not gonna dwell too much because I know this is my area, so I would like to move to Vitaly and see what you think as well.
Thank you very much, Urania. So it was interesting to attend this event, and there were a couple of themes and topics that allowed to kind of to be an enter points for us. However, it was a talks on. You can see those topics in any field like AI, ADI, ethics. They're all relevant to each of the field, and especially for mediation as well. So it was helpful to have a mix of different activities like talks. And the talks was, I have to mention that they were quite short. There was not a lecture, 1 hour lecture. It was a 10, 15 minutes talks, which helped to have a kind of understanding of the topic and the points the presenters made. Also, it was very interesting to participate in the workshop, love letters and breakup letters. I think I think for us with Brian, it was very, very interesting. However, I connect those activities with what we mediators do in our field, where we have a conversation with different people. Maybe it's a family or it's a business, where they basically have a breakup in their relationships, and we trying to frame their communication to help to emphasize what was good in relationship and what was not good, but talking honestly. And this is approach like to use basically emotional intelligence to approach difficult topics is a very innovative, I think, approach. And I would I would like to see this approach and this exercise in my field as well. I also met the networking element is very surprising because I met my countrymate from Kharkiv, and she's a lecturer in I don't remember the correct name of the university, but it was very good to catch up, and it's a good reminder that the teaching is the way of continuity and resilience as for in our nation, but also as a professionals who are trying to move on with their lives. And what else? The ethics also is very important, as we deal with very sensitive topics and with people lives, and some of those conversations are very sensitive and confidential. So while we're teaching students, and part of my job is teaching students and practitioners how they can help other people to resolve conflicts, and that is not always possible to do observation or so we do a case scenario, we do role plays, and using AI in those regard is also innovative, where we can be more create more safe environment for learners, but also look after the ethical concerns. So it was very interesting. Thank you, Urania.
It's fantastic to hear. Thank you so much both for sharing your thoughts. It's fantastic to hear that elements of the conference resonated with your own fields. So I think perhaps that's something we can explore a little bit more as the next part of the discussion. So if you're both happy to pick one specific area and tell me that resonated quite well with you, what stood out for you specifically? So kind of moving into the evaluation part and making it a bit more more tailored to your field as well. So again, I'll start with Brian simply because you're the first person on my screen.
That's fine, no worries. So again, partly linking back to, as I say, I thought even around the feelings and thoughts, and it kind of feed nicely into the evaluation. I think, I did recognise that sometimes in terms of like undertaking specific pieces of research, we tend to strip away how people actually describe experiences. It's very much kind of around, let's put you in a bucket so that we can measure that, so that we can kind of capture that. And even in terms of innovation, activity, it's very much driven by often, quantitative kind of measures. And I think we lose the value of the individual in that process. It's sometimes the depth of an individual's experience and their kind of life is lost in that. So again, I think the poetic inquiry, I did find so rigorous and so useful, just in terms of a different methodology for that kind of lived experience question. And I think again, even in terms of kind of how we approach economic development, we design programs, but we don't invest in practitioner development necessarily. So we lose that ability to kind of keep people on the journey and make them feel like actually we have that confidence to engage and to speak with a business owner and know what they want to get out of that journey, that it's not just about here's the profit and here's the numbers at the end of the day, but ultimately about, well, what is the purpose of your business? What are you there to do? How are you going to make a difference? So yeah, that for me, kind of in terms of the translation of the individual as being core, I think is something that very much kind of taken from the conference, and I'm still kind of mulling over in terms of how to apply that.
Fantastic. And I think that's part of my reflection as well, is the fact that you each have mentioned different parts of the conference. And I'll let Vitali discuss what stood out for him as well. But what you mentioned there kind of resonates with me very nicely, because I always find that the educational anatomy conference are very inclusive. And I always thought that when I started as an early career anatomist, I felt that they were inclusive, and I still feel they're very inclusive. And I felt at ease when I entered the discipline because I came from a clinical background. I wasn't trained as an anatomist. And I'm delighted to hear that you felt the same way and you picked something up that resonates with you. So it's not just for us working in the field. So I think from my point of view, when I'm evaluating the event, I feel very happy to hear that this is the case, and you have actually taken outcomes from from this conference that you can apply to your own practice. Vitaly, I'll move on with you because again, I don't want to take over the conversation. I'm very keen to hear your thoughts. So,
And
for yourself, what stood out particularly?
there is many things that stood out. It was a real in one day you got so many experience and knowledge that you actually need some time to work on it. So I think I would say that the right word is overwhelming, but I think there's both positive and both when you acquire knowledge, it feels literally heavy. So, but with the help of the peers and colleagues and the vocabulary, it helped to kind of structure the knowledge and see where those knowledge can be applied both in academic but also in a practical sense. And regarding what Brian mentioned and you, Urani, about that the environment was accessible. Maybe it's particular for me that maybe my emotions a bit overwhelming, but the environment was welcoming and inclusive. So entering the room, you're not feeling that you're a stranger, but you're a participant of the conversation, and you can engage with the participants without fear that your question will be silly. There is a couple of emerging ideas, and I spoke with during the network time. I spoke with some people at the stall, and I asked what could be the interlinks between anatomy and mediation, and it was very interesting reflection that the anatomy is studying the structure of human body, and mediation is studying the structure of human communication, and both are looking into how those connections are built and what the layers, how connection works. The same in mediation, but they also look, when the issue, they look into how far the issue gone into disrupting different chains and systems. If your finger is not working, but maybe there is a problem somewhere else, and the same mediation is not working just with an issue, it's just looking in what's underlying issue and what the systems are not working. For instance, if we are talking about relationship, maybe what's the disagreements were prior to the conflict, what emotions people felt, and what was important for them. Just to help people to come together and find a solution, you need to work on all those important issues. So it was very interesting. I really like our discussion. And as well, the anatomy, so it also tells us that the body is whole and it's not, each of its part is not isolated. The same in mediation. Our life and our relationship they are not isolated. They always have connections and interaction. So I think that's in professional terms that helped me to see the similarities and how both disciplines approach learning, and they also approach learning how to learn. So because knowing anatomy is one thing, but then passing your knowledge to students or learners is another thing. And you need to be very creative on how you engage with students and how you engage with the learners. And some of those particular approaches, like escape rooms, VR, using VR, what else? The same with allow and break up letters. They say to us, don't be too attached to the previous experience or previous how do you used to do things. Try to be more creative, because new learners, new students, they will look for something to be different in engagement, and applying those maybe more innovative styles is what we need to change in the way, for example, I doing things. So that would be slightly moving to the action plan, but I think, yeah, that's also stood for me as well.
Fantastic. This is brilliant again to hear that there is these elements of the conference that are so transferable to other disciplines, and you can see how you can actually implement them in your own discipline. Before I move us into the action plan, I want to tease out the evaluation a bit more. Thank you again for sharing your thoughts of what stood out specifically for you. Is there anything else that perhaps you found surprising, or anything that you didn't expect to be part of the conference but was there? Again, I'll start with Brian, and then I'll move to Vitaly. Again, totally no specific reason, and then I'll keep adding my thoughts after you finish, because I think it feels that it's not flowing naturally well like that.
So I think kind of evaluation into kind of a bit of analysis of where my thoughts are at the moment. So I think there is that kind of notion of like what are we defining as explicit knowledge versus tacit knowledge. So obviously there's kind of, the teaching of spatial reasoning as an example. And for me, it's that we treat innovation skills as innate. It's kind of very much, oh, it's just natural practice. So again, it's that kind of, particularly from the educational side of things, how do we look at what people need to learn to do? I think there's also the kind of notion of, again, I took out the kind of hidden curriculum. elements of things. So again, you know, looking at things like funding design, networking events, how we communicate some of those implicit messages in terms of actual practice. I think there's also a need to kind of examine some of the everyday practices and not just kind of high level strategies in terms of what we seek to do. I think for me, again, looking at the application of what I've taken from the conference, one of the things is around kind of again like economic modelling. And I think there's again the problem of it risks obscuring some of the lived reality. So I've talked again about that kind of the individualism that we always seek to kind of just group data and make assumptions about it. But sometimes it is that kind of piece of data that's off to the side that's actually the most relevant one, because that's the one that's, you know, needs to be catered for and needs to be considered in terms of how we learn and how we actually move forward. So it's making human experiences more visible as part of that kind of policy process, that they are intrinsically why we exist and what we're here to kind of support. So again, taking that conference experience, and again, just very quickly kind of picking up on one or 2 points Vitaly made around, I suppose, the kind of engaging with people in the day and the kind of, I suppose, the distinction between what would be for me like a public sector event into the academic kind of field. So I quite enjoyed again the kind of stalls. I enjoyed the opportunity to kind of have conversations with people very much disconnected from my own practice, but finding that common ground. And ultimately, that's what this whole program of events is designed to do, is to look for ways that we can bridge those gaps, look for ways that communication can work across, that it's not just treated as here's how we do it in our respective disciplines, but where's the commonality. So I think, yeah, that's probably a good way to round it off.
Fantastic. And again, it's great to hear because you both have mentioned the networking and anatomy. I think one of the things that, not for the conference, but generally in anatomy, I found networking one of the things that has always been a thing that has supported me throughout my whole career. And I'm glad to hear that you also found it through that particular event that networking was a useful experience. It wasn't just about seeing a product and buying the product. It was actually about networking and learning and that exchange of knowledge. So that, from my point of view, as the person hosting you at the event, in terms of the evaluation, kind of resonates with me that it's something that we do in general and perhaps a good practice, something that we can share with other disciplines as well. So I'll move on swiftly to Vitaly, so you can share your thoughts as well. And then perhaps after that, we can start thinking about our action plans.
Yeah, thank you, Rania. I think anatomy is a very practical discipline. You can literally see what's happening and what's the reason, like in mediation and maybe in those sectors where we deal with not material matter like communication or maybe justice or maybe social impact. It's very difficult to measure that, and such example as anatomy or maybe, I don't know, house building, those help us to create a very good illustration of how difficult things work, and that create a good connection point. However, we talked today about that anatomy is not an easy discipline, so you need to know particular words and understand not the narrative but the context, but also it helps for the other person to relate those things towards themselves, and you can see the direct impact of anatomy is improving our knowledge of human body and contributing to everybody's health. And those, I think, those are important important points where you communicate, as Brian said, in third sector, in public sector, you communicate the benefit of what you're doing, or you communicate the benefit of the topic you can have those examples to explain why this is important, because there's so many things people are concerned about that it's very difficult to work with their attention and attract attention to the topic that you believe is important. I also, as you, Rania, mentioned, networking is what was very important part for our interactions before the conference. We had a meeting and we had a conversation about what will be the content of the conference, and receiving the instructions for maybe how better to consume the knowledge and content, but also meeting after the conference. We had an opportunity to also to have a catch up. So I think that's the peer support is important, no matter in what sector you're working is, and have a good networking, a good connection. Whenever you go to the conference on anatomy or economic conference, it's important to have those people who help you to adjust to the environment. And in the end of the day, we're humans, we are very adaptive and we learn very fast. So I think that's the value of the project and the value of the such interaction is creating those networks that actually work as neurons. They pass the knowledge, they pass the signals, and it's important for society and professional networks that you will be able to collaborate better on the projects that needs interdisciplinary approach. Most of the issues in our society, they need interdisciplinary approach. You cannot solve it just doing one thing. You need to consider different perspectives. I think that's kind of my evaluation, my feeling about the whole event, but also coming to our third event within our cross-pollinating perspective group.
That's a fantastic point, Vitaly, especially the peer support, because I think that's something that is that's emerging through all of the events, as you said. It's each of us supporting each other and creating that. It's like Maslow's hierarchy. The first is the safety. You were feeling safe where we're going because I can't remember. I think it was you that you mentioned that you didn't feel like a stranger going into the room, but there was that glossary at the beginning. There was that discussion that we had, and that's something we have done for other events. So again, that's something that perhaps we can consider for as a potential outcome for the future. So with this, actually, that kind of links very nicely into the next part, which is the action plan. And I think if that's okay with both of you, I would like to start because I have heard about your thoughts and evaluations, and they have actually strengthened a wee bit more of my own action plan and my own positionality, not just within the project, but also within the anatomy community. And I have found that actually having that common language, that glossary, to make sure that everyone understands what we're talking about, especially about the human body, which is something that we all have a human body, but also we may not know all parts of the human body. So having that glossary to make sure that we all talk the same language and we understand, and we don't feel embarrassed to ask that question because we have the knowledge and we have what is required for us to understand what is passed to us. And something that you also mentioned, Vitaly, is the human body links with medicine and healthcare, is also perhaps how we can translate that as anatomists and how we can strengthen that into healthcare as well, because we teach a lot of students, not just anatomy students, but also students who go into healthcare like medicine, dentistry, nursing. So I think that's my in terms of action plan, that's more about me of how I can make that stronger, that glossary, that community that is more open and people can understand more about the human body. Uh, in terms of the general project, I would like to hear your thoughts, and then, and of course, your own action plans. So, and then I'll jump in with my action plan again for the project. So I'll start with Brian again, if that's okay.
No worries. So I think for me, kind of like pulling together some of the kind of thoughts and even like going back and reflecting on my attendance at the event, I think for me it's not just about direct transfer of knowledge or going in with a view of I'm going to learn all about anatomy in a day, but it's for me about richer ways of seeing challenges, that there is, that opportunity to engage with one another and look at, I suppose, kind of where again that can be applied in my own practice. So again, it's taken more of a systematic approach to practice, and rather than just abstract frameworks, it's again sometimes getting dirty or getting involved and actually seeing the difference that your work makes. I think it does make the world a difference, and particularly as you take on more senior positions within organisations, it is often necessary to kind of almost you create almost a professional distance, because it's like, well, I actually have to focus up here. I have to be removed. I have to be that this is what we're working towards. It's more vision led, but there's a need to sometimes actually come back down to the coalface and look at the practice, look at actually this is the difference it's going to make. And I think, even obviously there's consideration of things like technology and how that's applied. There's definitely lessons there for economic development. And sadly, our colleague who had attended one of the previous events, Ben, wasn't able to come along to this. But even for me, it's kind of, I went into it with a head of, right, I'm public sector practitioner of economic development, but fundamentally it's with a view to supporting companies on their journey and understanding what the private sector would want. So there was an element of, well, actually, here's life sciences, or here's the application of technology, and here's the cutting edge, and here's the growth potential. But fundamentally, again, it just comes down to how do we talk to one another. So looking explicitly at some of the kind of actions, regardless of what happens with the cross-pollinating project moving forward, I think for myself, I want to maintain that discipline of attending conferences out with my field and looking to do that at least twice a year. So regardless of where I end up or what I'm doing, that I want that experience. I want that opportunity to learn about different things. I think it's also about, I suppose, how I take some of that kind of structured approach into innovation and making practice kind of, I suppose, explicit and teachable. That so often we kind of undertake a piece of work and it's done, and we're not then looking at, okay, how do we build from that? How do we do something different? What's not worked, and fundamentally what could be improved? I think it's almost kind of seen as ad hoc siloed pieces of work. And I want us to be able to kind of think in broader context. I want, the whole point of innovation is to do things differently. So fundamentally, if we're going to do things differently, let's look at the application of learning. Let's look at what's happening in other fields and how that could actually be taken in to improve and to drive forward change across disciplines. Um, fun, Finally, I think I've often sat on funding panels, been part of kind of reviewing applications, and I think for me, there is a need to maybe sometimes review funding design, and even again how we kind of make funds available to undertaking particular pieces of research. Because again, if our outcomes are so focused on quantitative measures, we often lose the individual experience of why does it make a difference? What's that actually going to achieve? So I think again, sometimes there is a need to put the human back in humanities.
Absolutely. And I think it's that. So you tapped on something very important, which is that knowledge exchange, and how do we maintain that knowledge exchange? And I think a potential outcome from a, a potential recommendation from this project can be having that champion for each conference or discipline, who can also act as a buddy or as a mentor for people who are not necessarily from the same field or discipline, who would like to join that conference, to pace them through the conference, to establish what is, um, uh, to signpost, which is might be the most appropriate session to start with, to build their knowledge slowly. So I think actually the project is coming quite nicely into a set of recommendations in a way. So absolutely agree with you, Brian. And from my point of view, I'm also hoping to do the same, because talking more widely about the project, I have learned so many different things. I have connected with people out with my own sphere, which has shown me what not just interdisciplinary learning is about, but also transdisciplinary into different sectors like third sector. I have never engaged with anyone from the third sector, so that was fantastic for me to have that experience and bring that experience back into my university as an academic. So absolutely agree with you. So perhaps something we can contemplate for the future of how we can do that. Again, I don't want to take up all the time, so I would like to move on to Vital to share his thoughts as well.
Thank you, Rania. Thank you, Brian. I think I agree with all you said, and there's brilliant ideas around how experience of the cross-pollinating perspective can be transferred to different sectors, but also how different sectors can share their learning with this kind of project. And there is a couple of applications that Brian and Urania you mentioned. I would just want to add a couple of them. One is like Brian mentioned, the funding experience that he can basically see how those knowledge from different conference can be applied and change the approach to the design of funding, but also the funding knowledge can be helpful for both third sector, which is, for example, we apply for funding to deliver the project, and as well for such knowledge can be helpful for academics who apply to receive the grants to do the research. And I think some of those learning points in this field could be very universal, and the approach to writing an application could be similar. And it's because, as Brian mentioned, and I will repeat it again, human is in the center of every interaction. So there will be a human on the other side of the of your application, reading it and trying to understand what you would like to achieve. And for example, for myself, I'm working with people, but I also use the knowledge that coming from, for example, from anatomy, from neurobiology, just to get extra knowledge why certain things happen when people, how hormones works, how works our immediate reaction to stress or danger. So all those comes from the knowledge that was built by the certain disciplines, and without those interactions, you actually cannot make a holistic practice. So those interconnections, I really like this approach you, Rania, suggested, that the ambassador or the champion of each field can suggest learners or practitioners from other fields come up to the conference or networking events in particular area, and be able to kind of be a person who give a brief introduction, explanation of the field, and be the person who you can talk to, because maybe it feels very uncomfortable when you go to the conference and asking a lot of questions, why this, why that, and people are not expecting you. Maybe I have an assumption that people expect you to know those things. So you just feel this a bit tension when you start a conversation, and you just ask one question per time, and maybe it's not enough, and you would like to have an extra help or extra point of reference. Well, I think this very nice ideas around how those knowledge can be transferred in the action plan.
Absolutely. I think I don't want to say anything too big about the project or create more work than we have to do, but perhaps that could be the next phase of the project, a natural continuation on coming up perhaps with a list of potential disciplines and then identifying a champion within each of them, and then people can approach them and work with them. Uh, Fantastic. So I'm delighted to hear all of these thoughts, and I'm delighted to hear that you enjoyed the winter conference, the Anatomical Society Winter Conference. Before we close the meeting, is there anything else that you would like to mention that we may have missed, or anything that you feel is important to let the audience know?
Nothing particular, I suppose, just to watch this space. I think the plan is obviously to identify one further event as part of this cycle for the programme. So hopefully, as I say, we'll kind of find a suitable private sector event that we're all able to attend, and do a further write up from that, and then with a goal to kind of, I suppose, pulling together intelligence from across all the events we've captured, and look for those kind of commonalities, look to kind of, I suppose, create maybe some kind of tool or some kind of methodology that can be picked up by either other YAS members or wider disciplines, anyone that wants to pick it up.
Fantastic. And if everyone is happy, I will conclude the meeting here. So thank you once again. I hope everyone has a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All the best.